Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen. We are pretty far apart, but we're right here together on the Postgame Podcast. I'm actually over in New England for the weekend for a family occasion. Daniel and Mark Brennan, as always, on the scene for Penn State road action. And Penn State on the road for more Big Ten play today. A 41-13 victory over Northwestern. When you look at that final score, you think, okay, Penn State covered that major spread. They handled their business, but as we'll get to it, it's our job to kind of boil this thing down. I think James Franklin said afterwards and look at some of the not so pretty aspects of this victory. But Daniel, you're out there, out in Evanston, sweating through the final stages of your existence out there on this trip. What was kind of the vibe with the players, with James Franklin and post games? James wasn't all that interested in pointing toward the warts of this when it didn't sound like in post game. It was more, hey, 41-13 was where he kept going back to.
Yeah, I think that when you look at this, that James Franklin talks about going 1-0 every week, and Penn State did exactly that with its win at Northwestern today. I mean, it really wasn't pretty. And I think that if you talk to James Franklin, that he'll emphasize that not all of them are going to be pretty. I mean, he talked about it after the Illinois game a couple weeks ago. But I think it's a win that does have a lot of warts on it. But at the same time, there's some positives that you can really take away from what Penn State was able to do, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So, this team has a lot of work to do as they go into their bye week. You come out on the other side with UMass, and then after that, you've got Ohio State. So there are a lot of things that Penn State is going to have to get sorted out pretty quickly. But, you're 5-0 at this point in the season. The calendar flips to October tomorrow morning. You're 3-0 in the Big Ten at this juncture. You've got a top 10 ranking. It's hard to ask for much else. But, as we know, there's a lot of work to do.
Daniel, Mark shared an interesting note with us as this game was wrapping up. Penn State Northwestern attendance reflected as 25,064 today, which is by far the smallest crowd to see Penn State play in football when we weren't in the middle of a pandemic and no one was allowed to see the Nittany Lions play in person. What was it like there in pregame? You and Mark were there very early in the morning on Saturday. This one kicked off 11 a.m. locally. The worst fears were kind of realized for Nittany Lions fans as Penn State had that sleepy start and ended up being down 10-3 pretty deep into the second quarter. Were you sensing that something like that may be set to take place going into this matchup based on what you were feeling on the field?
Yeah, I think so. I rolled in around 8 o'clock this morning, and the parking here is it's a bit of a walk. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. And on the walk in, it's just kind of like you're in a very quaint suburb. It's not until you get really, really close to the stadium that you start to see sort of any semblance of tailgating. I think it's what James Franklin talked about earlier this week, where, they were practicing without the crowd noise. Are you going to be internally motivated? Are you going to be externally motivated? The Penn State fan base, I thought, showed up well. I thought Northwestern had a decent student section. I mean, not everything is going to be Beaver Stadium in a whiteout, but they did draw some students who were packed into this one section. And so I think that there was a little bit of adversity. I mean, I think we kind of talked about it in the, bring your own juice type of the way to phrase it. And I don't really think Penn State brought the juice early, at least offensively. I thought defensively, they did. But yeah, I mean, only 25,000 people here. I don't know what it actually is. I'm really bad at gauging those types of things. But you're coming off that whiteout with 110,800 people in Beaver Stadium last week. I mean, Ryan Field, the way it's set up, it doesn't make it the most intimidating or most fun kind of environment. I mean, personally, I kind of liked watching this. I like the setting here. The way that it's set up, it's very green, very grassy. It feels like you're, part of the landscape. But obviously that's not necessarily conducive to a big time college football atmosphere. So I think that Penn State did come out a little flat. They didn't really help themselves early with some of the mistakes on special teams. but they were able to work through it, I think, feed off that defense, and then go from there.
Northwestern had 13 total yards in that first quarter, but it's 3-3, and they eventually end up taking the lead. We hadn't seen Penn State trail in a game for quite some time during this lengthy win streak. They had a pretty astounding stat. They were the second longest mark in the Big Ten in the last 20 years when you look at this thing in terms of not leading 6 consecutive games they hadn't trailed. That changed early on, 3-0. That continued to change 10-3. But let's go back to the very beginning, because so much of the conversation this week, aside from, hey, watch out for that sleepy start in Evanston, which did happen, was no turnovers. Look at this team. They're the only team. They're the last team in the FBS. No turnovers. They don't turn over the ball. Then we get the offense out on the field. Turnover. Nick Singleton fumbles the opening kickoff, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, Nick Singleton, ball security has not been an issue for you, except when the opposing team is the Northwestern Wildcats. And we ended up seeing a few balls hit the turf. Drew Adler had a fumble out of the pocket on a hit. Katron Allen, before he exited the matchup, had one punched out. Those were recovered by Penn State. This one was not, and it was part of the reason why the Nittany Lions faced some adversity early on this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I had after they lost the coin toss and Northwestern deferred, I had the tweet all queued up, and I think I did post it on our board that this was going to be the first time that the Penn State offense was going to start on the field this year. And because of Nick Singleton's little fumble there, you didn't even get to that point. So I put Penn State in a really adverse situation, but I thought the defense responded really well. They pushed Northwestern back on that drive and forced them to settle for a field goal. And then outside of that one long drive later in the first half, I thought that the defense played really well, had them where they wanted them. The mismatch in the trenches was so clear. But Penn State was really, it felt like, on its heels. I mean, you don't expect to be trailing in a game like this, and you definitely don't expect to be trailing because of a turnover the way that this season has gone. I mean, it's like 11:05 a.m., 11:10 a.m. I think the commercial breaks probably pushed that back a little bit in the early going, and they're already losing. So it's very different. I think it was probably a bit of a shock to the system. And yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it sleepwalking the way that things were going early on, but they did need to wake up. And I think that you saw that in the second half with how things went. But I think that the defense really held up its end of the bargain and really helped get things rolling.
I mean, they have these beautiful streaks. The point streak now, it's 12 consecutive games, 30-plus points. They 41 points on the scoreboard today. They've scored in more consecutive quarters than anybody in college football. But the real consistency with this team, and I would really even go back to the 5-game win streak to close out last season, has been this defense. There hasn't been a week where they didn't show up. There hasn't really been a half where they didn't show up. And whereas the offense has had some series here and there, or maybe some quarters or halves this season that you could point to and say, okay, what was that about? That was a bit of a clunker from the offense. The defense just hasn't had those kind of lapses. Even as they've gone to the second and occasionally third stringers, they've been able to string together some really good football. And so while this offense, they had an 11-play, 53 yard, 5-minute field goal drive. I mean, these are the kind of field goal drives we've been seeing from Penn State lately. It's just these time-consuming third down conversion, occasionally the fourth and short conversions. But beyond that drive where they pick up 3 points via Alex Felkin's field goal, 3 punts on those first 4 possessions. And meanwhile, Northwestern, they lose 4 yards on their field goal. Well, I'm not going to call it a drive. They were given the ball on the opening kickoff. They get the ball, they lose 4 yards. They cash in still with the field goal. Then they lose 3 yards on their next possession. They pick up 9 yards on their next possession. And then they go on this 10-play, 59-yard drive that takes 5 minutes off the clock for themselves. And all of a sudden, it's 10-3, Daniel. And that upset alert text is getting sent out to phones all across college football. And you've probably got friends, and I know I had friends and family hit me up and saying, "What's going on, Penn State, man? I thought this is supposed to be, and I thought you were covering a national championship contender." And our message board starts to burn down. And fortunately for Penn State, they flashed another one of those kind of statement drives to kind of stabilize themselves before halftime. They weren't able to convert on a second opportunity to score late in the first half, but while the defense is doing its work, and we'll shine more of a spotlight there, that was huge to see that 6-play, 63-yard touchdown to match things up at 10-10 and send this team in intermission, knowing full well that Northwestern is getting the ball after halftime, but feeling like, okay, you found yourself a little bit there. You found something.
Yeah, it felt like Penn State got really aggressive at that juncture, that it kind of got up, that their backs were against the wall. They knew that they needed to do something before halftime. And I think that the way that James Franklin has talked about the middle eight before in his time, that he's very cognizant of the fact that Northwestern is going to get the ball to open the second half. So I think you saw that with right after Penn State scored and they kicked the ball back to Northwestern. James Franklin has all 3 timeouts, and he's trying to call them to get one more bite at the apple before halftime, which they did and couldn't convert. But I think that going into that drive, Penn State was really cognizant of what they needed to do. They knew what the situation was, and they really responded and delivered. So, I thought that was, a positive to see. I think that if they went into this game at halftime trailing, 10-3 or 10-6, that, you're looking at a much different complexion coming out of halftime. I mean, I think that it might not happen against Northwestern the way that this team is constructed, but against better teams, you can only call on your defense so many times that there's going to be a time where, they break instead of bend. And I think that you were watching this game, like, you never really felt like that was going to happen against Northwestern just because of the talent out there and the fact that, AJ Henning is a nice player at wide receiver. I thought Ben Bryant threw a couple good balls, but the mismatch was just so big in the trenches that you never really felt that, Northwestern was going to make something happen. Obviously, that's not going to be the case, through mid-October and into November. But yeah, I think at that moment, Penn State, the offense kind of buckled down, got the drive and got to the end zone. And that just really, really set them up nicely right there. I mean, we saw Trey Potts take the ball in. He gave them a nice little jolt there. And I think it just got Penn State to where they really, really needed to be, going into halftime.
It was a first and 10 situation from the 13-yard line. So not quite first and goal, but right on the doorstep. And Trey Potts just does all the work himself. We're so used to seeing Penn State require 3 plays to get first downs these days, or maybe even 4 plays and a cloud of dirt. That's just the style of football that we've seen of late, where, it was a little bit different to see Trey Potts pretty much go untouched. Nice wiggle out there in the open field. He reaches the end zone. And for a guy who spent 4 previous years in the Big Ten West, he's doing some damage back in those stadiums, Daniel. He threw a touchdown to give them a spark against Illinois. He reaches the end zone here in a 13-yard rush. A little bit later on to put this one on ice officially even more and to make some people happy out there in the betting world, he takes a 30-yard reception from Bo Pribula where he does a lot of the work on that one, reaches the end zone. So 2 touchdowns. I know right before we sat down to record this podcast, you spent some time writing about the day that Trey Potts put together. It's his 5th game with Penn State. Remember, he got to campus in May following graduation from Minnesota.
Yeah, this day I think really belonged to Trey Potts as much as this day could belong to anyone on the offense. The way they performed, I think Keandre Lambert-Smith is probably the only other guy that really has a claim to a great day on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe Nick Singleton, but I thought that Trey Potts really showed what they brought him in to do today. You saw Kaytron Allen get dinged up at the end of the first half. He was on the sideline for the entire second half, didn't have his helmet, was sitting with his teammates, watching from the sideline. And it's something that, I thought about a lot this offseason when Penn State was, doing its roster management. You saw Kevon Lee transfer out, and you knew that Penn State had to make an addition at running back. Is that, Penn State was just so fortunate to get through that stretch run last year after Kevon Lee got hurt, without Nick Singleton or Kaytron Allen getting nicked up. And that at running back that it's, you don't want to see anyone get hurt, but if you're being realistic about it, that at some point it's going to happen just because of the nature of that position. And it happened today with Kaytron Allen. It's an undisclosed thing. James Franklin said it was early. He didn't have his medical report and, just threw in there that probably wouldn't tell us anyway, even if he did know. But you call Trey Potts' number. There's a reason that he's here. And this is that type of thing where that number 3 running back is going to get called into action here and there. I don't think you're going to see a game this year where Trey Potts gets 15 carries, but what you saw today was he had 4 touches and scored 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's what you call efficiency. He was on special teams too. When Daquan Hardy returned, I think Northwestern's last kickoff, you saw Trey Potts. He almost got flagged for an illegal low block, but he just threw himself at the Northwestern player that was on kick coverage. So, I think that you're getting a guy who is here, knows his role, isn't expecting too much, but when his number's called, he's going to show up. And Mark Brennan was down there on the sideline at the end of the game when Trey Potts caught that touchdown pass, and he saw James Franklin, pull Trey Potts into an embrace on the sideline and tell him that he was proud of him for more than just the touchdown in that moment. And, we saw it in the post-game news conference where James Franklin took the opportunity to take that injury question about JB Nelson and Katron Allen and make it about Trey Potts and use it as an excuse to shout out Trey Potts, to highlight what he's done, to lay out that, Trey Potts isn't, he's not getting all these touches. He's not getting all these reps, but he's there. He's in the room. He's a presence. And pretty much every time they've called his number, he's delivered. So I think that speaks to what you're getting with a redshirt senior running back. I think he almost has 1,200 career yards, 10 or 11 career touchdowns coming into this season. And he just showed up in a very, very needed way today.
Yeah, Williamsport native, a guy who was on campus a bit, getting recruited, but never really came to fruition where he was an offered recruit. Injuries late in his high school career had a big role in that. And then he goes off to Minnesota, and he ends up being the primary backup to the most accomplished running back in Golden Gophers history, in Mohamed Ibrahim. And now here he is, knowing what the situation is with those 2 sophomores. But this was a circumstance where you didn't see it at all last year. And now here in the second quarter, we're going to have to learn more about it. We're going into a bye week, so it'll be something to kind of chew on, I suppose, when we examine storylines coming out of the bye week and when they get back to action in Beaver Stadium against UMass on October 14th. But between now and then, Katron Allen's officially, at least in that questionable status for us, because it's an undisclosed circumstance. I don't think it's going to be anything but undisclosed before kickoff on October 14th. But he looked visibly frustrated. We know this is a guy who loves football. He didn't get on a plane and fly out to Evanston to watch everybody play football. He was at 6 carries for 27 yards on the day. You figured he's going to kind of share that load again of carries, and it ends up being Nick Singleton's 21 carry game for 80 yards. That ties the most carries that Singleton has had at any point in his college career. He added a team best 6 receptions on the day for 39 catches and a touchdown. Singleton continues to be more active in the passing game. But with Allen, look, it changes the complexion. We just talked about what Trey Potts did for you and how important he has proven to be, where you're not relying upon a couple true freshmen or walk-on in this circumstance. But with Katron Allen, if he's gone, if he's even sidelined, or we're even talking about this being more of a one-man, a definitive one-man or holding that starting job in Nick Singleton, then it's going to intensify on Singleton. Again, long of 16 today. He did get loose for the 16-yard catch as well, but still not seeing him carry the offense down the field. We haven't seen that kind of a moment for Nick Singleton. He's up to 20 touchdowns in his young career. He's got 7 touchdowns on the season. Reaching the end zone, scoring has not been a problem thus far, but just below 4 yards per carry. That's kind of where he's been for much of the season now, and we're about halfway through this regular season. Whether or not Katron Allen is available coming out of this bye week or not, I think Nick Singleton, you're going to want to look, and this ties into the entire run game. The production has to be more robust. It has to be more threatening on a week-to-week basis if Penn State's truly going to bust the lid off their ceiling and break through as a Big Ten title contender and a Big Ten title winner.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need big plays to beat some of these teams that are on the schedule down the stretch. And I think last season we saw that Nick Singleton can be that kind of player. I mean, he ripped Auburn's heart out down there in Alabama last September. And we just haven't seen that from him yet this year. And I think that when, from everything we know about him, everything that we know about the offense, the continuity that they had up front, the development on the offensive line, I think the running game was maybe the thing that people were least worried about coming into this year. I mean, I think that we thought that we would see Nick Singleton just kind of pick up where he left off last year, just running, just through opposing defenses, whether it's Big Ten, the non-conference, or what. And that just hasn't really happened this year. He had a couple nice plays today where he showed a little bit of wiggle or got tripped up once he got through a hole. I think that there was one play where I believe it might have been Sal Wormley. His guy got off his block just maybe a split second too early. And if he hadn't, Nick Singleton might have had a really, really nice run. But I think Nick Singleton is someone who is going to do whatever the team needs to do to win. We saw him in the passing game. I think he had 3 catches for 35 yards or so. He was someone that Drew Aller was looking to when he needed him. 6 catches for 39 yards. But I think just looking at, and you saw Singleton too, pushing Drew Aller on those quarterback sneaks and stuff like that. So he's going to do whatever it takes to win. But yeah, I mean, we just haven't seen those explosive plays. I know Mark Brennan talked to him for a little bit after the game. I need to go through and see what Nick Singleton said. But I think that, coming into this weekend, I think we were all expecting the breakout, given what Northwestern is on defense, fair, irrational or not, we all kind of felt that Nick Singleton was due at this point in the season. It didn't quite come through fruition. So I think this bye week is big for the Penn State offense and really trying to diagnose some explosive plays, figure out, what is next and then going from there.
Yeah, this was the Northwestern bringing in the Big Ten's worst defense in terms of rushing yards allowed per game. Today, Penn State gets 134 total rushing yards on 39 rushes, 1 sack allowed. I know you noted it earlier, but J.B. Nelson was lost pretty early in this contest, the starting left guard. He was carted off the sideline. That was shown on the television broadcast today. James Franklin, in answering about J.B. Nelson, said he was back with the team. I couldn't quite read into that answer. Daniel, unless I'm wrong, he never checked back into action. Venga Ioane, obviously, a step back up a left guard, but J.B. Nelson's one of those kind of open-ended situations, correct?
Yeah, I think that was just James Franklin's way of, not really answering the question, but still saying something, because we know that, you always have to ask, but because at this point we never know what we're going to get when we ask about injuries, but I think that we most likely know what he's going to say. So I just interpreted that as, like he's going to fly back with them, and then they'll figure out what it is from there.
Yeah, we'll have Game Snaps breakdown up this weekend on Sunday at Lions 24/7, kind of reviewing how the guys got worked in due to some of these injuries. You'll see obviously more Trey Potts at running back, and Venga Ioane is someone they have full confidence in. He started a couple of weeks ago. He's basically been getting a starter's share of things, but it does complicate things. You're losing a heck of a player in J.B. Nelson, a guy that seems to be an ascending figure at the guard position, but you're also then taxing Salim Wormley to another degree and asking him to stay out there for series after series rather than getting him off the field occasionally. So it does change some things for you, something else to monitor from a health standpoint. From an offensive perspective, I mean, the third quarter changed everything, and it changed everything on both sides of the football. Northwestern decided to gamble a couple times in that third quarter, and sandwiched in between those gambles, Penn State came out and delivered exactly the kind of authoritative drive that you maybe hope to see from the Nittany Lions after intermission. They had to wait to get the ball back. Again, they were supposed to have the ball first. Nick Singleton fumbles it away, and so they give the ball to Northwestern to open that half, quickly get it back. And Daniel, they march down the field, and this is another one of those occasions where they've got a few situations where they can tack on a field goal, relatively easy field goal for Alex Felkins, or go for it on fourth down, get to that goal line. And the worst case scenario is you leave what is not an impressive Northwestern offense on the doorstep of their own end zone, going up against your very impressive defense. So I think it was the right move. Drew Aller ultimately gets through on the second try, and that punctuates a 12-play, 68-yard drive, very much of what we saw over and over again against Iowa. That put them up 17-10, and really it felt like forced Northwestern to get more aggressive than perhaps they wanted to, or at least reach into their bag of tricks. And the ensuing possession is when they go for the fake punt. The freshman, Zion Tracy, steps up, comes up with a tackle about a yard before that marker, and all of a sudden the Nittany Lions are set up with a short field. They get a field goal out of it. But there you go. I mean, the game's totally turned around. It's 20-10. You're doubling them up on the scoreboard. You had one really good possession for the offense, one really bad possession for the offense. But because of what your defenses are doing along the way, you get out of that 10 points.
Yeah, that's obviously where the game really flipped. I mean, you're coming out 10-10 out of halftime, and you get that. You get a 3-and-out to start, which this defense these past couple of weeks has proven really adept at that. And then the offense just kind of goes to work. It wasn't necessarily pretty and it wasn't necessarily smooth, but you score on 3 straight possessions, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, and suddenly it's a 27-10 game. And that just allows the defensive line just to be able to feast on Ben Bryant and that Northwestern front. So, yeah, I thought that was obviously where the game, really swung. But it felt like the point in the game where you could really go for a big play. Like Nick Singleton would break one off, Drew Aller would go deep, and you could really land a knockout blow instead of grinding it like they did. That first touchdown, you've got 4 plays from the 3-yard line and in to get it into the end zone. I mean, and initially I think that they ruled that Drew Aller didn't get in or was short on one play. I think things are running together a little bit, but when you're putting it in the hands of like a judgment call and ball placement, that's always a little bit of a risk. After that one stop, they had the chance to make it a 2-touchdown game, but a 3-and-out, have to settle for the field goal. And then after the fake punt, though, they were able to assert themselves, really push it in. And I thought a really, really neat play call from Mike Yursich on that touchdown to make it 27-10, where you motion Nick Singleton to make it look like it's going to be a quarterback sneak. Singleton leaks out into the flat, and Aller gives him the ball. I thought that was a nice little wrinkle that they had plenty of opportunities to set up based on what had happened on earlier series. So, I thought that was where you saw the Penn State offense, kind of find itself a little bit. You saw some creativity. You saw some guys make some plays to move the chains. But at the same time, you would have liked them to see after the first 4th down stop, to do more than just go 3-and-out. To really punch it in, to really put Northwestern down. I mean, because that's what you're going to have to do against Ohio State, against Michigan, where if you get a gift like that, you're going to have to score 7 and not 3.
And Trey Potts, by the way, popped up again on that second touchdown drive of the third quarter to make it 27-10. He had a 4-yard gain on a 3rd and 4 where he really muscled through a defender on Northwestern to keep the chains moving. 2 plays later, a 2nd and goal from the 2 is when Aller finds Nick Singleton for the touchdown strike. There's Singleton's 2nd touchdown of the day, Aller's 2nd total touchdown of the day. He now has 10 total touchdowns on the season. To go with no turnovers. You still got the turnover for the team, I guess, is blown out the window via Nick Singleton's kickoff return. But your offense now is through 5 games and into its bye week without a turnover. And that starts with the quarterback. More on the quarterback in a second. But yeah, I'm just self-editing myself here because I had the order wrong. It was the quarterback rush that they attempted, Northwestern attempted in between that field goal and that first touchdown of the third quarter. They had Ben Bryant trying to basically match what Penn State was doing on those short yardage runs. Ben Bryant on 4th and 1 from their own 31-yard line, I think it was, trying to rush. They didn't get it. Defense steps up for Penn State as it has really all season, and they get the field goal out of that. And then you've got on the ensuing possession, so Northwestern back-to-back, they go for it on 4th and 1, don't get it, and then they go for it on the fake punt run. They don't get it. And that's all she wrote. Once Penn State gets that touchdown to Nick Singleton, it's 27-10. We had a really long look at Northwestern's offensive attack by that point. And pretty soon afterward, you've got Ben Bryant actually exiting the game with an injury on a collision with Zane Durant. When Northwestern's down at the goal line trying to cut this one down to maybe 10 points, they cut it to 27-13 ultimately. But Zane Durant was a big reason why there weren't more than 3 points, Daniel. He had a sack of Bryant on third down at the doorstep of the goal line. And this is a guy who had 3 tackles for loss to go with that sack today. James Franklin spent some time praising him in post-game. Sophomore player. I thought he was one of 2 sophomore defensive linemen who just splashed all through the field all day, along with Nittany Sutton.
Mm-hmm.
But Zane Durant, if you're getting this kind of an interior twitchiness and that interior penetration, there's a reason he was a third down pass rush specialist last year. Now he's an every down guy, and you're starting to see why there's been so much buzz about him in the Lash building.
He's got a ton of athleticism. He's got a unique build at 6'1", 285, which I think makes him a bit of a tough matchup. But that athleticism and that burst really shined today. That sack that he had of Ben Bryant, I mean, he was just in the backfield immediately. Like, there was no chance. He delivers a big hit to knock Bryant out of the game. And that was really sort of felt like an exclamation point on how things have been going. But I think that we've seen a lot with the edge rush where a couple holding calls can probably be called here and there. Chop Robinson is probably fighting through more than a little bit in that department. But we've seen the defensive ends be close a lot this season where they're almost there. They've got their arms out right when the quarterback's releasing the ball. But if you have that coming from the middle, if you can marry that to pressure up the middle, I mean, it'll make things so much easier on the back end for Penn State. So I thought Durant, I think this is the type of performance that we'd been waiting for from him for a while. We've heard about him since he got to Penn State, basically from day one, as someone who impressed a lot. We saw him play a lot of football last year. We've seen him move into the starting lineup, I believe, a couple times this year. And for him to come up with a game like this and really provide a spark on the day when Penn State needed something from its defense to really push themselves over the finish line, I think that bodes well. And I think that he can put himself in a position to really contribute a lot down the stretch.
Kobe King had a couple tackles for loss. Yeah. He had a sack. Adiza Isaac had a sack. You had Nittany Sutton, as I said, with a sack, and that was just part of his involvement. I felt like he was just disrupting plays and forcing guys to do things. It's fun to see this former 5-star blossoming as a sophomore. You had Keon Wiley and Zariah Fisher getting involved with the sack. 7 total sacks, I believe it was, for the day. 12 tackles for loss for the Nittany Lions collectively against Northwestern. Yet again, eliminating an opponent under 200 total yards. It was under 100 yards against Iowa. I don't think you're going to keep that up. But unless I'm mistaken, this is 4 out of 5 games now, Daniel, where the opposing team has failed to reach 200 total offensive yards by the time things are done. Manny Diaz is dealing right now. And as we know, he's got the depth to throw a lot your way. And between a bye week and UMass, there's a lot to workshop here for a defense that just hasn't given you much to poke holes.
I mean, he's pushing all the right buttons right now when it comes to the defense. We've seen a couple complete performances from them these past couple weeks. I mean, nothing is going to be as complete as what we saw last week against Iowa. But this showed just the talent that they have. Putting guys in position to really make an impact. We saw that third down, 3 defensive end rush package again this week, a decent amount. And Northwestern was in a lot of third downs. So you had the opportunity to really let them eat. I do think Kobe King had a really, really nice game. I think that he is really come into his own in that Mike spot. I do think that with the talent of some of the other linebackers that, he's not necessarily playing that much football, and you see him come off the field in certain packages. But when he's on the field and he's in the middle, it feels like he's in control, and he's playing with just a really high motor. I mean, that sack that he had, he misses Ben Bryant, I think on a pump fake, or Ben Bryant steps up in the pocket and Kobe King regroups and is able to bring him down behind the line. I think that was just a really, really nice hustle play. I think that he is someone that really did a lot of work this offseason that's paying off right now. But the defense as a whole, everything just really seems to fit together nicely. You did have a couple plays here and there with some shaky tackling in the open field, but they did their jobs in limiting these mistakes. There's no kind of real busted play that leads to a 70-yard touchdown. It felt like they were in control. You're not going to be as dominant every week as you were a week ago, but they just did such a good job of getting off the field when they needed to and giving this offense the opportunities to take the lead, take control, and pull away.
Yeah, Northwestern's leading rusher on the day was backup quarterback Brendan Sullivan, 25 yards in garbage time. So it says a lot about what they were able to do against Northwestern on the ground today, putting a lot of pressure on them to try to make it work against the perimeter. Tough task against this defensive backfield. Daquan Hardy keeps the momentum ball rolling in the right direction. 4 straight games now with a takeaway for Penn State's defense. Daquan Hardy, 2 of the last 3 games since he got back into the swing of things with an interception now. So 66-0 on the season now in the third quarter. I just want to go to that because to me, that's clearly the sign of a team that is handling its halftime correctly. Let's keep doing what you're doing in halftime. But I think it's another testament to the depth and the attrition that we're seeing play out. It feels like a weekly basis, the same story. The opposing defense, limits Penn State to 2 to 3 yards per rush in the first 2 quarters, and then all of a sudden it's 4 to 6 yards per rush in the third quarter. And the opposing offensive line, which kind of held up firmly through the first 2.5 quarters, starts to show cracks, and eventually the dam opens up by the end of the third quarter. I mean, we're not making it up when we were talking about it in August. This is a very deep team on both sides of the ball. They're using that specifically in the trenches. And third quarter, 66-0 through 5 games. That's a reflection of that to me.
Yeah, it's a pretty mind-boggling stat. Especially given the fact that the offense it hasn't felt like that it's been super crisp all season long. But, whatever adjustments they're making at halftime, we talked to some of the players today about the halftime message, and they said that the message every week is that it's 0-0. No matter what the score is in the game, they're coming out that they want to win the third quarter, they want to win the second half. And when you talk about pushing the right motivational or messaging button, I think that's one that's really working for Penn State. So how sustainable is that going to be? We'll see. But I think that we've really seen Penn State gap its opponents in the third quarter. We saw that against Illinois. We saw that again today. I think that having the depth, having the conditioning, and having the athletes, I think that's where the talent gap really, really shows against these, inferior opponents, even if it is a Big Ten team. So I think that's going to be something to track as we move forward. How does Penn State continue to really put the foot on the neck of its opponent coming out of the break and use that as the opportunity to really, really kick things into gear through the third quarter and into the fourth.
Once again, it was a day where Penn State was starting out with the ball in great situations. Average start of their own 42-yard line today on the road at Northwestern. That's been a common theme, helped in large part by this defense, obviously. And when you see 41 points and when you think about Katron Allen not being available and Singleton maxing out at 80 yards on the ground, you may think that Drew Aller had himself a really impressive kind of day out there. But that was not the case. He was actually below 50% pass completion at halftime when this was a 10-10 game. He finishes above 50%, but barely. 18 of 33, 189 yards, 1 touchdown. And there were some really kind of head-scratching misses. You're thinking either, okay, this is a young quarterback showing that he's still a young quarterback, or the offensive meetings didn't exactly work to effectiveness by the time they got to Saturday, because we're talking about receivers not being in the area of these throws in some key situations. Now there were stretches that touchdown to match touchdown drive to match the scoreboard in the second quarter, the long touchdown drive that he ends up punctuating with a run in the third quarter, where he had some key third down throws. He got hot. He found Keandre Lambert-Smith a couple times. He found Theo Johnson another time. And those were important throws, but there was a lot of opportunities here, Daniel, where Penn State could have really wrapped their hands around Northwestern's neck, stayed on the field, just move the chains, move towards midfield, continue to put the pressure on them. And instead it would be a 3-and-out or 5 or 6 plays, and all of a sudden you're off the field because of some misses. So Drew Aller, right around 50% completion away from home, right around 80% completion back home in Beaver Stadium through those 3 games there. We've got a lot to learn about him. He hasn't lost. He hasn't turned the ball over. He hasn't been forced to play catch-up in the fourth quarter. He has been forced to save the day on the road to this point. So there's a lot of stuff we're still learning about Drew Aller, and clearly they can survive less than stellar performances. But this is one that reminds you that he remains a work in progress. And even though we think he can be a #1 draft pick when it's all said and done here with the Nittany Lions, it doesn't mean he's a #1 draft pick here on September 30th, 2023.
Yeah, Aller's performance, it felt like that the way that the game flow was early on and the opportunities that he had, he really did have a chance to really dice up this Northwestern defense. But some of the throws that we'd seen him make through the first couple weeks of the season, especially those outs to the sideline, some things over the middle where there's a guy open. He had that one incompletion to Keandre Lambert-Smith where, like, directly over the middle, where it just felt like he kind of short-armed it and it went behind. It wasn't really an assertive type of throw. But we just didn't see the Aller that we saw in those home games. It seemed a little tentative at times. Missing. There's some of the misses to the outside, I think, were what really, really stood out to me. The misses there. We did see them try to take some deep shots late in the fourth quarter when the game was out of reach. He couldn't quite connect on those into the end zone. They got close. And Aller just really does throw a pretty ball, but
James Franklin let his opinion be known. I don't know if he'll change it by the time we get him again, if it was brought up, but he said after the game that they felt like one of those deep opportunities, that there was an opportunity to come there and it wasn't hauled in by the receiver. It would have been a heck of a catch by Dante Cephas to complete a heck of a throw, but they need these receivers to make heck of a catches if they want to be an elite level squad. It didn't come through there in that moment for Cephas, but that was, you're right, that was that kind of kill shot moment that we have not seen through 5 weeks, and the ball was where it needed to be, maybe a bit toward that back end of the end zone, but they went for it.
Yeah, the Aller and Cephas connection today was one that left a lot to be desired. I felt like that they just didn't quite seem to be on the same page, whether that's the mechanics of the play or what, but I think going back to Aller's decision making and not turning the ball over, I think that that's what James Franklin keeps coming back to. That the easiest way to lose the game is to give the ball away. And Aller hasn't done that. He did have that fumble that Penn State was able to gather, but he's averted disaster, and it hasn't even really felt like he's ever been on the brink of disaster. You've seen quarterbacks in the past where it feels like they're walking a tightrope every time they drop back. And Aller doesn't feel like that. So, every time I come away, impressed with something else with him. He had one play, I have to look back at the juncture, but he was wound up to take a deep shot. Like, he was on his back foot, he had the ball down and he was set for launch. And in a split second, he just, I think, felt pressure off his back and just, got out of the pocket, got to the outside, and didn't feel like he missed a beat. I forget how that play ended up. But I think that seeing that just shows kind of how his mind is working, where his focus is. It seems like Penn State has really drilled into protecting the football. Part of me feels like if these running backs were able to, do what they did last year in terms of big runs and big chunk plays, we might be talking about Aller a little bit differently at this point in terms of what he's done and what he needs to do. But it does feel like we're getting close to a point where he's going to be called upon to win a game, and he's really going to need to step up.
Quick math here. So don't hold me to it, but I think he's at 218 career pass attempts now at the college level, including those 10 game appearances he had last year, now 5 starts. 218 throws he's put up there for grabs as a Power 5 quarterback. None of them have ended up in possession of the other team, and that's damn good. That's you can't ask for much more, especially when you got the defense to back you up and this ground game. Although, again, we haven't seen the ground game carry Drew Aller to the finish line in any of these games. We've seen them help put away some of the contests, but Aller has had to do his part here. It hasn't been able to kind of sit in the background, I don't think. And he would really expose this team to some dicey circumstances in some of these contests. You think about this matchup at Illinois, some of those stages of the West Virginia game where if he were to lose a handle on the ball in the pocket, or if he were to put the ball up for grabs and swing momentum, those games may look different. Maybe you're not able to empty the bench in the fourth quarter, and maybe things, that come off the track a little bit. You never hit those moments, and you're in your bye week. And we know what we do know about Drew is that he's a guy who likes to self-dissect a little bit and self-evaluate. So he'll have 2 weeks to do that. and then he'll come up against the UMass defense that I don't know how long they'll have to prepare for Drew Aller, but it won't be long enough, and expectations will be high next time we see number 15 in Beaver Stadium. And by the time we get there, Marcus Hagans is going to have a lot of work to do with his wide receiver group. You talked about the disconnect of sorts between Cephas and Drew Aller, and you bring up a good point because there's 7 recorded targets to Dante Cephas today, and the results were 2 catches for 21 yards. Keandre Lambert-Smith continues to carry the bucket of heaviest water in this room by far. 86 yards on 4 receptions. He had a 35-yard pickup. I think he had another 25-yard pickup. Those were on 3rd downs. He is where Drew Aller is looking when it really counts, it seems. You had Liam Clifford move the chains at one point on a 6-yard grab. He hasn't had a lot of volume this season, but it feels like his catch or twos each game, they matter. They matter to the offensive series. They're not throwaway stats. And the tight ends involved here a bit. Theo Johnson, 2 catches for 13 yards, 2 catches for 25 yards with Tyler Warren. But you're looking around the wide receiver group and you're saying who stepped up in the first 5 games here, and you say Keandre Lambert-Smith, after talking about it for the last 8 months, sir, you did it. You're clearly the team's number 1 wide receiver. And then you said everybody else, you got a couple weeks here. I'll see you against UMass. Don't really know what you're all about. We know Dante Cephas made back-to-back starts. I think that's meaningful in terms of what he maybe has shown the Nittany Lions coaching staff through his first month and a half or so of being at the Power 5 level in the thick of a season. But, he goes in. He had opportunities today, maybe when you talk about the balls that were thrown in his direction, where he could go into the bye week with a different narrative, maybe be entrenched as somebody who's going to be near the top of this depth chart. Instead, we're left with the same refrain, Keandre Lambert-Smith and just about everybody else.
Yeah, I guess we made it this far without mentioning that Harrison Wallace was questionable today, did make the trip, warmed up, and early in warmups was going through at the front of the lines, working as a 1. But then when they got into the passing skeleton, he was back with the 3s, and we did not see him. So that's twice in 3 weeks that Harrison Wallace hasn't played. He's been questionable for 3 straight weeks. We did see him last week for a little bit against Iowa. So that's one to monitor as we go through the bye week in terms of someone who could also have an impact on the passing game. But yeah, Keandre Lambert-Smith, I have to give him a ton of credit for really establishing himself as someone that Drew Aller can go to. All 4 of his catches today went for first downs. He did some nice things with the ball in his hand. And every time Aller threw to him and completed it, it just felt like it was something that they badly needed in a big spot. But after that, it's just, there's not really any consistency. We saw a couple targets for Omari Evans, and we saw him get some run earlier in the game. That hasn't really manifested into anything. I think that Cephas is one of those guys where, maybe if they hit on 1 or 2 of these deep ones, then maybe things really kick into gear. Liam Clifford has been, kind of quiet recently. Caden Saunders is still quiet. Malik McLean has been, pretty invisible these past 2 weeks. So it's just a really, really interesting situation. You need someone to step up. And I think that that's something that could maybe help Drew Aller and unlock things. But I think part of it feels like the basketball cliche where as soon as you see one go through the hoop, you feel a lot better. I think that if one of these wide receivers besides Keandre Lambert-Smith can get loose for a big play and make something happen, I think that could really, really open things up and help with the confidence of that group.
I'm trying to figure out if this receiver situation is going from intriguing to concerning for me. For a while, it's been, who's going to be the X factor? Who are the 2 or 3 guys in the next month or 2 that are going to really rise up, grab this opportunity, and be playmakers for Penn State down the stretch? And that was the intriguing aspect. And now we're through 5 games, and we got a couple weeks until we get a chance to see them again, and still don't have answers there. And it's been more of seeing guys get their run and not really have a lot to show for it, rather than guys get their run and then the next week it's somebody else and he's putting up big numbers. And maybe early on it looked that way, 300+ yards receiving for this wide receiver group in the first game. But thus far it's been Keandre Lambert-Smith, 25 catches on the season for almost 400 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. And then Harrison Wallace is still the next man up. He hasn't caught a pass since the Delaware game. and he's the next wide receiver on that list with 10 catches. So, you've got the tight end group to supplement this. There's no doubt about that. You've got Nicholas Singleton more involved. He's got 13 catches through the first 5 games here. But this is a room that when you're looking for, and this is the time of the year where you start doing it. There's a lot of teams that are still unbeaten, but that number is going to go down and down and down. And when you say what could hurt this team, I mean, a lot of people were saying it in August nationally. Do they have the firepower for Drew Aller on the perimeter? Do they have that? And Keandre Lambert-Smith has shown what he is. Would love to see Harrison Wallace get a chance to come back healthy. He's a guy that everyone was raving about in preseason camp, and I think we saw some of that show up on the field through the first couple Saturdays. But right now, it's just, again, starting to border that line from intriguing to concerning. And when you're 5-0 and you've won 10 consecutive games by 14-plus points, that concerning list is pretty short. And there's teams that are juggling chainsaws right now in their list of concerns at this stage of the college football season. But, Daniel, if there's something else you'd point to right here, coming off a 41-13 victory, it's our job, as James Franklin said, and it's his job to spend the next couple of weeks trying to figure out, what are the problem areas of an undefeated Penn State football team. We'll jump into it more in future episodes, but as you wrap up your time in Evanston, what gives you a little bit of pause about Penn State's title hopes, and what gives you encouragement about where they are going into the bye week?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the lack of explosive plays in the passing game. Yeah, I think that's something that really stands out to me as what you want to see from Penn State. You need those big plays. You need to be able to land a knockout blow. You need to be able to swing the momentum of a game on one play. And it doesn't have to be Drew Aller. Like, it could be Nick Singleton or Katron Allen or, Caden Saunders in the return game on punts. But you need some sort of big explosive play that's going to be able to flip a field or, just put a team back on its heels. We saw Penn State do that last year. I mean, you think about that Maryland game last year where Nick Singleton is running over guys and guys just don't want to tackle him by the end of the game. We just haven't seen that from Penn State yet. And I think that is something that's a little bit of a cause for concern because, you scored 41 points against Northwestern, but it wasn't an easy 41. You look at scoring against Ohio State, potentially having to keep up with them. I mean, that's going to be difficult, and you're going to need some big plays to make that happen. But as for encouragement, I mean, this defense is just really, really clicking. I mean, it's pretty easy, I think, to run out of superlatives for them. Manny Diaz is just doing a great job pushing all the right buttons. These personnel combinations, I think, are really, really working. And I think that the players are just confident. They're having fun. They know that he's putting them in a position to succeed. And that is what we're seeing on Saturdays.
Yeah, we haven't seen Penn State need to say, you have to win us this game, defense. You have to do it. They've played a lot of complimentary football, but we know, I think, that they could get that done if it comes down to it, if Penn State weren't able to reach that 30-point threshold finally in one of these matchups. But 5-0 on the season, number 6 right now nationally. They've got a week to kind of sit out of the fray and watch college football teams fall apart a little bit more. They've got bumps and bruises to handle more than at any point in the season right now coming out of this Northwestern matchup. So we'll be tracking some of that stuff. Just a heads up on our podcast plan for the upcoming week. We're going to go to Tuesday and Thursday this week. There's no post-game podcast next Saturday. That goes without saying. We're going to take our Monday podcast off the schedule this week for the bye week format. Let Mark and Daniel recuperate from their road trip a little bit. But we'll come at you with Tuesday, take more of a longer look at the Northwestern game, at these 5 games. And we'll have some fun with some guests this week as we get a chance to kind of come up and catch our breath after a 5-0 start for Penn State. Daniel, great coverage from Evanston. Wishing you and Mark well on your journey back to Happy Valley.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for holding it down in New England.
That's right. We're all over the place. Thanks to everyone for listening to the Lions 24/7 post-game podcast. On behalf of Daniel, I'm Tyler Donahue. We'll talk to you real soon.